Well, hello and welcome to this English lesson where I'm going to talk about fire. It's a hot topic today. Sorry, I'm trying to tell that joke with a straight face. It's a hot topic today. Be sure to warm your hearts. Sorry, let me stop laughing and get the lesson started. Welcome to this English lesson about fire. The topic today is fire. As you recall, last week the topic was water. I am working my way through the four elements. We'll probably do air and earth at some point. But right now we are going to talk about fire. There are a number of things that I have to talk about today. Once again, I was surprised when choosing this topic how many words and phrases I found. In fact, I could do a whole second lesson at some point where I just talk about phrases where we use the word hot or fire in them. I was on fire yesterday when I was looking for words and phrases. Hopefully you know what that means. It means that I was working hard and fast and I was doing well. But anyways, welcome to this lesson about fire. I hope that you enjoy it. Fire. Fire is something that has revolutionized how we live. Many, many years ago, somebody discovered fire and they learned that it was good for a number of things. It keeps us warm. It cooks our food. It helps us in an industrial age to do things. We can use fire to change and shape things like metal, for instance. So fire was probably one of the most important things that was discovered. Some people think that other discoveries are quite important, but I think the discovery of fire, whoever that first person was that learned how to start a fire, that certainly changed the course of history at the time. So fire, a chemical reaction where you get heat and light, and something that all of us use probably almost every day in some form. If you look at a fire, an actual fire, like in a fireplace or in a campfire, you will see flames. So flames are the individual flickers of light that you see in a fire. Flames are beautiful. Flames are mesmerizing. Flames will burn you. Flames will burn you if you accidentally touch them. But if you sit and look at a fire, you will see the fire, but you will also see all the flames inside of the fire. So they're kind of the wavy, glowing, cool parts of the fire. And mesmerizing, I'm not sure if you know that word, but I could sit and look at a fire for a long time. It's just very beautiful to look at. And especially when you just look at all the individual flames coming off the fire. In order to have a fire, you need fuel. That fuel can take many, many forms. The gasoline we put in our cars is considered fuel. Wood is considered fuel. Coal is considered fuel. But in order for the chemical reaction to occur, in order to have a fire, you certainly need fuel. You need something to burn. You need something to light on fire. So in order to have a fire, you need a source of fuel, or you need fuel. And I just mentioned a few. I see Judith in the chat saying mesmerizing. It is true. Yes, fire is definitely something that's mesmerizing, something that's cool to look at. Another word, this is more of a scientific word for fire, is combustion. So combustion is when you have a source of fuel, you have oxygen, and you have heat. And because of that, the fuel will light on fire. And it will produce smoke, which is kind of the exhaust part, and it will produce heat and light. So combustion is just simply more of a scientific term for what we normally just call fire. It's the word that we use it to talk about cars. Cars either have an electric motor or they have an internal combustion engine. Because inside of an internal combustion engine, we're actually lighting gasoline or diesel fuel is combusting. It is on fire in order to make things move. Let's see here. 96 Pranavi says combustion. The chemical process occurred with the help of oxygen, the product, heat, and light. Thank you very much for that. So the verb we use when we talk about when something is lit on fire is to burn. Okay, so in the winter, sometimes I burn wood in my wood stove. When my furnace in my house starts up to heat our house, it burns oil. We have an oil furnace. In this picture, you can see someone is burning a book. Sometimes in certain countries, they will ban a book and then people will burn the book. But the verb we use to talk about a fire or creating a fire is that we will burn something in order to have a fire. In order to light something on fire, please pay attention during the lesson to not just the words I'm teaching, but the phrases I'm using. That's kind of how these lessons work. They seem like simple vocabulary lessons, but they're actually they're a level more complex than that. So this is a lighter. This is actually a Bic lighter. Merci pour créer. I don't know what the word is. Is it allumage? I can't remember in French. This is a lighter. It's a Bic lighter from a company in France called Bic. And it is one of the things you can use to start a fire. If I wanted to start a fire or if I wanted to light a fire, I would probably use a lighter. I don't smoke, but if I smoked cigarettes, I would light my cigarette using a lighter. I could also use a match. So a match is a small, usually a piece of wood, sometimes cardboard, with something on the end that is flammable, something that burns easily. And you strike a match and it produces a flame. And you can use a match to light a fire or to start a fire as well. And one of the things that many of us have in our homes, many of us have candles. So candles are one of the simplest ways to produce a little bit of light, especially when the electricity is not working. When you don't have electricity, when the power is out, sometimes you will pull out the candles. Maybe you have a box of candles somewhere in your house, and if the power goes out, you will light candles so that you can see at night. En français, on dit briquet. Merci beaucoup. Bernard says lighter is briquet en français. Merci beaucoup, Bernard. So what was I talking about? Yes, when the power goes out, sometimes you light candles, although it is considered somewhat dangerous. When the power goes out here, we do light a few candles, but usually we use flashlights instead because they're safer. We don't want to accidentally start a fire with the candles that we have out. Candles can be a fire hazard. See what I mean? You got to listen to what I say, don't you? I'm using a lot of different phrases. We don't use these anymore, but a long time ago in Canada, people would have lanterns or lamps. We kind of use the word interchangeably. A lantern or lamp usually has a source of fuel in the bottom. It's usually some kind of oil. In fact, many of them were called oil lamps. And then you kind of have what's called a wick, and you light it, and then you have light. So a lantern or lamp is not used for heat, even though it does produce a little bit of warmth. But generally, it is used to give you light. And sometimes if you watch an older television show, especially a Western, something that takes place in the West in the United States, you'll often see people using lanterns or lamps. And I know around the world, people still do use lanterns or lamps. We actually own one. We do have a lamp somewhere. We just don't currently use it because once again, it is a bit of a fire hazard. A fire hazard is something that could accidentally start other things on fire. That wouldn't be good. So let's talk about those two phrases. There's a big difference between the phrase to have a fire and the phrase to be on fire. Okay. So sometimes we will have a fire here at the farm. We have an area on the farm where we put wood and we light the wood on fire, and we have what's called a campfire. We would use this phrase to describe it. I would say to my brothers and sisters, hey, we're thinking of having a fire on Saturday night. Do you want to come over? Bring some marshmallows and hot dogs. Or, yeah, we had a fire last week. When you use that phrase, you mean you're having a small fire, usually a campfire, to enjoy, to sit around, usually at night, okay? But when something is on fire, okay? So when you use the phrase to be on fire, you're talking usually about something like the house was on fire, okay? Or their house accidentally caught on fire. Their house was on fire, so they needed to call the fire department. So there's a big difference between having a fire, which is a controlled, planned activity, and to be on fire, okay? Now, I did earlier use the phrase that I was on fire yesterday. This is an idiom we use, a phrase we use when we talk about doing a job quickly, doing a job well, doing a job efficiently. You could, if you're talking about an athlete, you could say maybe your favorite football player was on fire in the last game. That means that they always had the ball, they kept scoring, they did really well, they were on fire. Hey, in order to have a fire or to start a fire, sometimes you need kindling. So if you look at this picture, the really, really small pieces of wood at the far end and the middle pieces of wood, we would call kindling. Kindling is wood that's cut into very, very small pieces or lengths of wood that are easier to start on fire. When you have a log, a big log, it's hard to use a lighter to start that on fire. But if you have little pieces of wood or small sticks, it's a lot easier to start that on fire. And we call that kindling. So if we have a campfire on our farm, I usually get my axe and I get a piece of wood and I cut it into small little pieces to use as kindling in order to get the fire started. I see Mode Ags is singing "This Girl Is on Fire." I don't know who sings that. Oh, is it Alicia Keys? Possibly. Great song. I'll have to look it up later. But yes, kindling, small pieces of wood that you will use when you want to start a fire. And generally, the most common type of fire that I would see in Canada would be a campfire, okay? We don't often light fires to cook, although I do know that around the world, it is still quite common to have a cooking fire or to light something up, to light wood on fire in order to cook. But we generally have campfires. Even if you're not camping, we call it a campfire, okay? So on my farm, when I invite my brothers and sisters over, we have a small campfire. No one is sleeping in a tent that night, but we just call it a campfire. So a campfire is a small fire, and it's made for two reasons. It's warm and cozy and gives a little bit of light. I guess that's two reasons already. The second reason is we do usually cook some food over it. We make, we roast hot dogs. Sometimes we roast marshmallows, and sometimes we make something called a s'more. Not sure if you know what that is. You might want to look it up on the internet. A bigger fire we would sometimes call a bonfire. So a bonfire is a very large fire, okay? Similar to a campfire though. It's when sometimes when people have a big party, they will, instead of having a small campfire, they will have a bonfire where they light a fire that's just really, really big, like maybe 3 or 4 meters high. They'll just light a bonfire. There are some places in the world where they have huge parties and they light bonfires. So a bonfire is simply a really, really big campfire. When you have a fire, you have smoke, okay? There's a phrase about this that I'm going to teach you later. But when you sit around a campfire, there are flames, but there is also smoke that comes off the fire. Usually when I'm sitting around a campfire, the smoke always seems to blow towards me. And then I usually have to move to find a new place to sit. But one of the things that you have when you have a fire is you have smoke. So again, if you have fuel and if you have a source of heat or something to ignite the fire, and if you have oxygen, you will have a fire, and that fire will produce, in a car we would call it exhaust, but with a campfire we would call it smoke. When you have a fire as well, you have embers. So embers are small little glowing particles that come off of the fire. As much as flames are mesmerizing, embers that come off of a fire are mesmerizing as well. Glowing embers. Sometimes they land on your clothes though, and then they burn a hole in it. I've had that happen a few times where the fire is crackling and popping, and all of a sudden a hot ember will fly off the fire. It'll go pop and it'll land, and you're like, oh, and you want to get it off of your clothes because you don't want it to burn a hole in your clothes. After a fire burns for a while, let me make this a bit bigger. After a fire burns for a while, the wood starts to turn a little bit black, and we call this the coals. It's not actually coal. Coal is a fuel that they get out of the ground. It's like a hard black mineral. I think it's a mineral, but coal is something you can dig out of the ground and burn. Coals with an S is what's at the bottom of a fire. Sometimes when we have a campfire, we let it burn for a while until it's just coals, and then we cook over the hot coals. So coals are like the black and slightly glowing hot parts of the fire. That's the best way to cook. You can cook over the open flame, but sometimes that burns things. You also have ash when you have a fire. I think you're familiar with this, that when a fire burns, it produces heat, it produces flames, it produces smoke, but at the bottom you have coals, but you also have ash. So this gray substance we would call ash. Ash is something that we have to clean out of our wood stove when we are using it, because if we don't clean the ash out of the stove, it starts to build up. Madi says black mineral. Yes, I think it's a mineral. I need to take some science classes. If I'm going to teach English, I need to make sure I know my science as well. One of the other cool things about a campfire or any fire is that you get what's called firelight. Okay, so it's nice when you sit around a campfire because you see everything around you is lit up by the firelight. It's this beautiful, soft orange glow. You can see on these people's faces. You can see them because of the firelight. And firelight is a very cool, I find very calming and soothing kind of light. So here's your wood stove. There are many different styles. We actually have a wood stove in our house. We don't use it as often as we used to, but a wood stove is kind of a place where you can burn wood for heat. We don't use our wood stove to cook. Some people do use their wood stoves. They'll cook a little bit of stuff. Maybe they'll do a pan of soup. They'll make a pan of soup, but we don't do that. So I see in the question in the chat, Andre saying what the kind of coal is like charcoal. Yeah, a little bit. The coals, you know, when you burn wood partially and it's all black, you could call that charcoal. Again, I'm not a scientist. And then Rod earlier was asking about a fireplace, and I had mentioned that most Canadian homes, if they're going to burn wood, prefer to use a wood stove. But we do also have houses with fireplaces. A fireplace is more of an open area where you can burn wood as well. We tend not to use fireplaces for two reasons. It's a bit more of a fire hazard, so it's easy for embers to pop out. Usually people have a metal screen in front, but they're also inefficient. A wood stove is very efficient. It converts wood to heat really, really well. A fireplace is less efficient. So more of the heat just goes up the chimney. So again, a wood stove is very efficient. Okay, you get more heat for every piece of wood than you would with a fireplace, because a lot of the heat in a fireplace goes up the chimney. And so there you go, chimney. A chimney is basically a long, we say flue, by the way. It's a long, I'll say pipe, but it's not normally called a pipe. It's a flue that goes up to the roof of your house so that the smoke from the fire can get out of your house. So definitely, if you have a wood stove or if you have a fireplace, you definitely have a chimney. And if you have a wood stove in your kitchen, or if you have a fireplace in your kitchen, you will also have a chimney. Although it's not common for Canadians to have a cooking fire or a wood stove in their kitchen for cooking. Some people do have an outdoor pizza oven or an outdoor oven that they might use, but generally in our kitchens, we have electric or gas appliances. And then of course, the type of wood that you use is called firewood. This firewood is split. So when you have a log, you usually cut it to a certain length and then you split it, because when you split the wood into smaller pieces, it burns a little easier. Okay, so that is firewood. We have a stack of firewood in our shed, and when we need more firewood, we go out and get a piece. I see Eugene saying we have an electronic fireplace. Some people do have electric fireplaces. At our school, we actually have an electric fireplace in one of the rooms. And we have a fire pit. When we have a fire at our place, when we have a campfire, it's always in the same place. We have a place where we've kind of dug a little hole in the ground, just a shallow hole, and that's our fire pit. That's where we have a fire. Some people will get the old metal rim from a tire, and they'll use that as their fire pit, so their campfire's a little bit more raised off the ground. But definitely people, when they have a fire, they usually have it in a fire pit, just so that it's kind of contained a little bit in one place. Sometimes people just have the fire on the ground. Fireflies. When we are out at night, there are little flies that glow in the dark. I don't know if you have them where you live, but a lot of times when we're outside having a campfire, if you look away from the fire, you will see little, like a green-yellow glow that appears, and those are called fireflies. I don't think they exist in every part of the world. They are quite common here, though. We often see them in the summer. If we are outside at night, you sometimes will see fireflies. They're beautiful. It's kind of fun to sit and watch. Either the fire is memorizing, or if you turn and look into the dark, you'll see fireflies. So let's talk a little bit. Maybe I'll move to, let's talk a little bit about fire alarms. So houses usually have smoke alarms. Sometimes we call it a smoke detector. And buildings, like at my school, usually have a fire alarm, okay? And there's a slight difference here. A fire alarm has two components. It has a thing you can manually pull. You can pull the fire alarm, and then the bell will start ringing, and everyone will know they need to leave the building. But it also has a sensor. So it does have like a smoke and heat detector as well. And that can also set off the fire alarm. When you are in a building like a school or a library or an office building, if you hear the fire alarm, you're supposed to exit the building immediately and safely. So houses do not have fire alarms, but most buildings will have a fire alarm system. Houses usually have a smoke alarm, a smoke detector. Sometimes it's also a carbon monoxide detector or fire detector. The most common phrase I noticed on our packaging in Canada is to call it a smoke alarm, okay? So every year, sorry, my mustache is a little itchy. Every year we replace the batteries in our smoke alarm because we want to make sure the smoke alarms are working. We test them as well. There's a little button where you can press it to test it. And as the question earlier referred to, in Canada, you are required to have one smoke alarm on every floor of your house. Most people have more than that, okay? Just because people want to be safe. Fire extinguisher. A fire extinguisher is something that has things inside that will put out a fire. Sometimes it's water, but usually it's more likely some type of chemical that's really good at putting out a fire. On our farm, we have a few fire extinguishers. We actually have a small fire extinguisher by our stove. We have another fire extinguisher in our machinery shed, and we have another fire extinguisher in the barn, and we have a fire extinguisher by our wood stove in the house. A fire extinguisher is just something you buy and keep until there's a fire, and then you grab it, you pull the pin, and you shoot whatever's inside at the bottom part of the fire to put out the fire. So if you remember earlier, I said when something is on fire or when you have a fire, there's also a verb structure to put out. When you have a fire and you don't want it anymore, you need to put out the fire. Let's see here. Fire truck and fire engine. So this has two names. When we go to watch a parade at Christmas, the fire department usually drives in the parade with one of their fire trucks or one of their fire engines. I actually use the term fire truck more, but both terms are very common. The fire department, that's the place where the firemen work, the firefighters, has a bunch of different fire trucks or fire engines. These are vehicles that are built to fight fires. They have ladders, they have hoses, some of them have tanks of water, some of them have water pumps built in, and they have places for all of the firefighters to ride. And when they turn on the siren, you need to get out of the way because it means they're going to go somewhere to put out a fire. Yeah, we're doing well. So I used the word fireman just earlier, and we don't actually use the term fireman anymore. We usually use the term firefighter. Most of our names for occupations that are gender specific, like have the word man in it, we actually have newer terms that we've been using for the last 10 or 20 years that kind of correct that, because both men and women become firefighters. So you can't use the word fireman anymore. It doesn't make sense. So if you work for the fire department, we would call you a firefighter. You would go and fight fires. That would be your job. I think it's a very, very difficult job. By the way, in Canada, firefighters don't just fight fires. They also go to car accidents. They're also good at rescuing people if they, if people fall down a hill. It's usually the fire department that comes and rescues you. So firefighters do a lot more than fight fires, but we still call them firefighters. You want me to say that sentence again? Firefighters do a lot more than fight fires, but we still call them firefighters. Did I say that right? I think I did. Let's move on. So these two terms are kind of interesting. The fire station is the building. The fire department is the building and the fire trucks and the people that work there. Okay, so if you have a fire, sometimes you call 911 and they will let the fire department know that you have a fire. Okay, so again, listen closely. Fire station is what I would use to talk about the building. Fire department is what I would use to talk about the building and the people and the trucks. Like that's the fire department. And not always just the building, because sometimes you might say the fire department arrived. So it's more just the trucks and the people, I think. It's the organization that you're talking about. Hopefully that made sense. And then once again, if you have a fire, they come to put out the fire. When we have a campfire, when we have a campfire at the end of the night, we put out the fire. We get some buckets of water and we put out the fire. So if you want to have a fire, you light a fire. When you don't want the fire anymore, you put out the fire. In many cities, you will find fire hydrants. They're usually red, sometimes they're yellow. A fire hydrant is a place where firefighters can hook up their hoses in order to get water quickly. So if you go to a large city, or even in our small towns, there are usually fire hydrants kind of spread throughout the town in key areas, so that if the firefighters have to fight a fire, they can hook their fire hose up to the fire hydrant so they have water to put out the fire. Sorry, I don't know. They sound like tongue twisters a little bit, don't they? If a fire forcibly, I just want to use the word explodes, but if a fire is burning nicely with flames, it's just a fire. But if it goes bang and there's this loud noise and all kinds of flames and smoke, we say it's an explosion, and we would say that something exploded. When you watch TV shows, often if there's a car accident, the car will explode. Usually after everyone gets out of the car, there's an explosion. So an explosion is a violent release of energy, a lot of light and heat. Generally, you don't see explosions very often. Although some people, sometimes when they're lighting a fire, they will put gasoline or what you might call petrol on the fire, on the wood. And then when they light it, it blows up. There's an explosion. That's not recommended. I use newspaper and old pizza boxes to start my campfire. An inferno is simply a very, very large fire. So if a multi-story building looked like this, we would say it's an inferno. You might even say a blazing inferno. Okay, so an inferno is a really, really, really large fire. Different than a bonfire. A bonfire is a fire you plan to have. An inferno is usually when a large building is on fire. We would call it an inferno. When something can burn, it's flammable. Now, this is kind of funny. We have another word, inflammable, which means the same thing as flammable. And if you don't believe me, you can go look it up. I usually use the word flammable because it's not very confusing, okay? On a truck, if you have a truck that is delivering diesel fuel or gasoline, there are usually stickers like this that say danger, flammable, because gasoline and diesel fuel burn very easily. So it is a flammable substance. Anything that can burn is called flammable. At school, we sometimes have what's called a fire drill. A fire drill is when the fire alarm goes off, but there's no fire. So once or twice a year, the fire department comes to our school, the firefighters come to our school, and they set off the fire alarm because they want us to go through what's called a fire drill. And then all of the students and teachers go outside, and I have to take attendance. I have to make sure all my students made it out. And the fire department, they time us with a stopwatch, and then they go through and they give us a score on how well we did on the fire drill. This is just something you do to practice in case of fire. So this phrase is seen a lot. If you are in buildings that have signs, you will see in case of fire. And this simply means here's what you should do if there is a fire, okay? This one says, in case of fire, do not use elevator, use stairway for exit. So basically it's saying, if there is a fire, don't use the elevator. I think it's called a lift in British English. Don't use the elevator in case of fire. So this, you will see signs like this in many public places. It'll say things like, in case of fire, exit through the rear doors or something like that. Or in case of fire, do not use the elevator. That's a very, very common one. Older, taller buildings sometimes have what's called a fire escape. Modern buildings don't always have this, but there are parts of the city, like in Toronto, there are places where there are still fire escapes. A fire escape is a set of stairs on the outside of a building that you can use to escape in case of fire. So this building might have a sign that says, in case of fire, exit using the normal entrance or the fire escape. So a fire escape is a set of stairs on the outside of a building. Sometimes you buy things that are fireproof. I talked about how race car drivers wear a fire suit, which is a suit made of fireproof material or fire resistant material. This is a safe where you can put valuable things. And then if your house was on fire, the things inside the safe would not be destroyed because it's fireproof. So fireproof, we use that word to refer to anything that does not burn or does not completely burn. Sometimes they're just fire resistant, which means they do burn just very, very slowly compared to other things. But if something's fireproof, it usually does not burn. We had the question earlier about forest fires, and I listed all the different kinds of fires in nature. So we have brush fires, bush fires, grass fires, wildfires, forest fires. It all really just depends on what is burning. If the forest is on fire, we call it a forest fire. If it's more like a grassy area, we might call it a brush fire or a grass fire. If it's an area where there's more like bushes than grass, we might call it a bush fire. And then wildfire, all of those phrases are just used to talk about fire in nature that's out of control. So just fire that's not a campfire, not something that humans have control over, but it's not a building that's on fire. It's fire in the wild, okay? So often you'll hear on the news that there's wildfires in certain countries, or there's bushfires, or there's grass fires. And it's just when the world around you, the natural world, is on fire. Sometimes these are started by lightning. Sometimes they're started by people not putting out their fire properly. A person who lights fires on purpose is called an arsonist. So arson is a crime. We talked about that in our lesson earlier this spring on crime. An arsonist is someone who lights buildings and other things on fire, and it is against the law. It is called arson. It is a crime. I must say that in Canada, firecrackers are illegal. You cannot buy firecrackers in Canada. You can buy fireworks in Canada, which shoot up into the sky, but you can't buy firecrackers. So sometimes Canadians will go to the United States because in some US states you can buy firecrackers. So they'll buy different firecrackers. I may have done that once when I was younger. I may have went south in the US and bought some firecrackers. Fireworks, we have fireworks here in Canada on what's called the May 2-4 weekend. So we have Victoria Day in May. We also have Canada Day in July, on July 1st. And on those 2 days, you will often see people shooting off fireworks in their backyard, or you might go to a larger city to watch fireworks. And when you see fireworks, you usually say, ooh, ah. That's what I say when I see fireworks. So a couple of phrases, I'll get back to questions. One is the phrase dumpster fire. So this is kind of a funny phrase. So this is an actual dumpster, okay? When you look outside a building, you will see big metal boxes, and that's where people put garbage, and we call it a dumpster. Sometimes people light a dumpster on fire, and it's called a dumpster fire. But the more common use of this phrase is to refer to something that's been a horrible disaster. So you could say something like this, 2020 was a real dumpster fire of a year. What that means is that the whole year was just a mess because of COVID. You could say, their relationship is just a dumpster fire. And what you mean is that two people, they're always fighting and they don't get along. So dumpster fire is kind of a little phrase we use to describe something in the past that didn't go well or something that isn't going well. This lesson is not a dumpster fire. But if I had all kinds of technical problems, if the lesson wasn't working right and my internet wasn't working, I could say, it was just a dumpster fire this morning. But it wasn't. Actually, things are going really good. And we also have a phrase where there's smoke, there's fire. And what this means is that if you hear rumors about something, then there might be something bigger going on. Sometimes a politician, they'll say, so the politician was caught taking a little bit of money, but he said he was just borrowing it. And they might say, hey, where there's smoke, there's fire. He's probably been stealing more money, okay? So where there's smoke, there's fire simply means you've heard a few rumors about someone, so there's probably more that's true outside of that.